Sans in Undertale and Sans in Deltarune might be the same person. I know that's a bold statement, but it's a theory that's intrigued me since 2018. The Undertale cameos in Deltarune are pretty unassuming after all. We're shown very early on that this is a parallel world and these characters lead parallel lives. Toriel is a schoolteacher with a still-living human child and a son off at college. Her divorced husband is not a king, but the owner of a flower shop who fails to pay his bills due to his generosity. Alphys is a teacher. Undyne and Napstablook are cops. Metaton and Mad Mew Mew are shut-ins, so far unseen. This is all clearly an AU. Yet of all the characters in Deltarune, one sticks out a bit oddly, Sans the Skeleton, and by extension his unseen brother Papyrus. Many have theorized various things about the skeletons. Are they Darkners? The teleportation doors in the Dark World do share a similar effect as Sans' bedroom door in Undertale. Yet we know that when Darkners leave the Dark World, they turn into objects. Sans remains a monster. There are a lot of other possibilities. I've seen some people suggest that the brothers came from Undertale, Post-Pacifist. There are a few problems with this theory, however, like Papyrus. In Undertale, Papyrus is very outgoing, bombastic, and while he starts off a bit lonely and insecure, he's also ambitious and bold, staying up until 4 AM just to get Undyne's approval. Yet some might note that there is a dialogue option to tell Sans that it's good to see him again. To that I'd like to point out that this is just one of many recurring choices in flavor texts alluding to Undertale. As we the player control Chris, the game is written with our knowledge of Undertale in mind. Toby has called Deltarune a game you can play after it, after all. Then there's the grocery store, which is clearly modeled after Grillby's, with the serial number, or rather sign, filed off. But the Grillby's building existing doesn't necessarily mean he took it from Undertale to Deltarune. Consider how the name's been painted over, a lot like buildings that go out of business. This is purely speculation, but it's possible that Grillby used to have this bar in town and it went out of business due to the direct competition from QC's, which seems highly successful. It's too early to know the town's history, but the interior of the building has changed a lot. As Half-Bred Chaos pointed out in one of their videos, Sans has also been in town long enough to know Asgore's regular routine of asking for pickles. While it's true that he says he and his brother are new in town, new can be relative. But conjecture aside, this combined with Papyrus's reclusive nature raises a lot of questions. We've been teased with Trousling Bones. The Goner Maker does respond to Papyrus's name, where it does not for other characters we do see, such as Father Alvin. The Steam page describes Papyrus as busy. It's likely we'll see a follow-up later on, if Toby isn't trolling us. So we may not have a lot to work from with Papyrus, but I think a closer examination of Sans in Undertale adds further fuel to the fire. First, there's the hangout at the MTT Resort. While most of the dialogue focuses on Sans' meeting with Toriel, one line sticks out to me.
Your journey's almost over, huh? You must really want to go home. Hey, I know the feeling, buddo.
You might not think much of it on its own, but let's look at a few other curious things about Sans. First, there's his hidden laboratory. Of note are the following. There's a mysterious badge in one drawer. There's also a photo album which shows Sans with a bunch of people you don't recognize, looking happy. Finally, if you get the Clam Girl Fun event, the photo is replaced with a drawing of 3 smiling people and the phrase, "Don't forget." Before Deltarune released, people assumed this was a drawing of Sans, Papyrus, and Gaster, and took the drawing as proof that he had been forgotten by everyone but Sans. I did a video all about this misconception and others, which you can find in the info cards and description. But then comes 2018, and the end of Deltarune Chapter 1. Don't Forget is the title of the game's main theme. The 3 smiling characters? Possibly the Lancer fan club. What? You think I was gonna call them the Fun Gang? Everyone does that. Lancer's great anyway. And the drawing, well, here's an oddball possibility. Look at Ralsei's instruction booklet. While it went unused, the guide is full of childish drawings. While this is also pure speculation, it's possible that the drawing came directly from him. Maybe a bit of a stretch to expect people to read through unused files, but Toby already set the precedent with things like the unused entry number 17 in Undertale, as well as the him.png from Deltarune.com. Originally, this image quoted entry number 17 around late 2015, but in 2016 it changed to say, 3 heroes appear to banish the angel's heaven. It's funny how it started foreshadowing Deltarune years before the demo released. And when you add this to the fact that Clamgirl mentions Susie, and that the image only appears after that interaction, plus the fact that in the Switch version, Clamgirl's dialogue is expanded to say that the time to meet Susie is fast approaching, well, that's interesting, because Chapter 1 released mere weeks after Undertale Switch came out. Of course, Sans hasn't met Ralsei yet, on screen anyway. Once again, we have the weird teleportation doors to consider. Is it possible that Sans has been to Dark Worlds or will go there at some point? Papyrus has some interesting dialogue in Undertale that may support this. He says that his room is like another world. Granted, Papyrus follows this up by complaining about vacuuming, but isn't it funny how when you first arrive there, you're in the dark? Papyrus has to turn on the lights, and then he complains about pranks across time and space. There's a lot to unpack here, and we don't know enough to say with certainty. But Papyrus does have a few other lines that may be little nudges towards Deltarune, like talking about Trashy, who lives in the trash. We later see a Trashy in Deltarune Chapter 2, who in fact hangs out in the garbage dump. If the Papyrus Knight theory ends up being true after all, that would set an interesting precedent. I should really talk about that in its own video at some point. For now, Half-Bred Chaos has a neat video that discusses it to some degree. I'll link it in the description. Still, there are other things to consider with Sans. His battle recontextualizes his innocent line from his date.
Look, I gave up trying to go back a long time ago. And getting to the surface doesn't really appeal anymore either.
Go back to where, though? If we assume Sans came from Deltarune's world, he could be referring to hometown. His Lost Soul segment in the Asriel fight has further food to chew.
You'll never see him again.
The Lost Soul fights often project the character's innermost doubts and negative feelings, and you have to coax them by reminding them of all the good in their lives. This seemingly brief line could, in turn, lead back into Sans' mysterious past. So we have a badge, we have mysterious friends, and we have a mysterious place he at one point wanted to go back to, on top of him relating to a desire to go home. But wait! That's not all! In Undertale, Kesey talks about how one day the skeletons showed up out of nowhere and asserted themselves. If we assume they were thrown from Deltarune's world into Undertale, this could be when it happened. Of course, this theory isn't foolproof. For starters, what about Toriel? When Sans describes their meeting, he acts as though this was a stranger, despite Sans and Toriel being very close in Deltarune's world. However, do keep in mind that Sans is very good at maintaining a poker face. It's possible that he recognized Toriel's voice all along, and that was part of why he went against his no promises policy. The issue is he never refers to her by name until he learns it in Pacifist, and in certain neutral endings. There's also the question of where Papyrus fits into things. The Papyrus we see in Deltarune so far is a shut-in, possibly a lot younger, and in Undertale he acts as though he's never seen a human before. Though I will note that this particular scene is played as a joke. Papyrus asks if there's a human first before the pan back to the rock. The "it's a rock" line could just be Sans being a little stinker, as I doubt Papyrus can't recognize a rock from a human. Still, if Papyrus does end up meeting Chris, it is odd that Sans would say he's never seen a human before, let alone be so eager to catch one. I see a few possibilities. One is less than thrilling, as if Papyrus never meets Chris in Deltarune, it means that Undertale isn't contradicted. But that also means Papyrus would be a huge troll move, which I'm hoping isn't the case, even if the forgettable check text in Geno does kind of lend itself to this. Another possibility is that the age difference between Chris and Frisk is what throws things off. Or perhaps Papyrus, despite any friendship he could potentially build with Chris, is still willing to capture other humans out of a desire to appease Undyne and become a royal guard. He's a self-described brutal kind of guy, so it's not like there isn't precedent, especially if he turns out to be the Roaring Knight. It could be that he's very young in Deltarune, or it could be that he somehow has amnesia while Sans does not. That does feel a bit contrived to me, though, and leans a bit too much into fandom tropes, and I personally think it would be a bit strange. But as with any fan theory made from incomplete information, nothing is going to be perfect. And of course, some will gladly point out that Deltarune is confirmed to not be a prequel or sequel. However, it is very crucial to read Toby's wording here. He said, in response to the question about connections between the two games, "It's a different world that might even have different rules. That doesn't mean there will be no connections at all, though." That right there suggests that there could be connections, even if Deltarune itself exists as its own game with its own story and world. The fact that the fun events foreshadow Gaster, who was built up as a bigger deal in Deltarune, also lends itself to that. Although we don't have much to go off of with a potential connection between Sans and Gaster just yet. Editing dork here, I just want to touch on a couple other things that I missed in the initial video. First, there's the question of what Sans being from Deltarune would imply for Deltarune's ending. And that's a difficult question. I've seen some people suggest that Deltarune will end similar to Mother 3, where it's a bleak or at least bittersweet ending that somehow segues into Undertale's world. Perhaps the new future that Gaster wanted to create was simply Undertale. This would leave Sans and possibly Papyrus as the only ones who remember the world that came before. My main concern with this is that it might undermine Deltarune's narrative, because if Deltarune ultimately just ends in Undertale, which is certainly not a better future for the royal family, then it's just kind of so-so. Plus, with Toby trying so hard to treat the two games as overall separate entities, it would be kind of weird if that's all that Deltarune's ending amounted to. There's also the Riverperson, who speaks of a man who came from another world. Now, given the man who speaks in hands comment, it's also possible that this is just another Gaster tease, but if Sans does end up coming from another world, such as Deltarune's, it could be a tease about him and how potentially dangerous he can be on certain routes. I'd also like to take a moment to shout out Half-Bred Chaos's janitor theory, which posits that, in addition to running the grocery store, Sans also works as the school janitor, which could explain a potential tie to the Dark World, as well as the sort of dusty closet vibes of the initial landscape you see at the start of Chapter 1. Of course, like most of this theory, a lot of this does rely on speculation without a lot of grounding outside of little details here and there. It's gonna be a while before we get the full Deltarune picture, and because of this, it's really just debatable how much of this will be accurate. For all we know, Sans simply is just a separate skeleton, but it's still a fun theory to entertain. All this to say, there is a fun possibility here, but we'll have to wait to see what the rest of Deltarune holds before we can say with certainty. This is purely speculation, but at least it's a fun little direction to go. But if you have other thoughts and feelings on the skeletons and their connections between the two games, I'd love to hear them in the comments, as I think there's a lot of room for different interpretations. Also, if you're interested in content related to Sans and Papyrus, our team at Fireglow Productions just put out a new video for Inverted Fate. It's only gotten around 19k views so far, and we worked very hard on it. It'd be awesome if more folks checked it out, along with the rest of the Inverted Fate comic. Also, if you'd like to see more progress reports on various projects and get access to scripts, concept art, and other neat bonuses, head on over to my Patreon. The Work in Progress Alfie's script is currently available to the $5 tier and up, while other tiers get various other bonuses. Shout out to all the patrons you see on screen, and to everyone, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day!